Thank you for joining us today for today's session of Retail Transformation, Pillar 3, Sustainability and the Supply Chain. I'm Shannon Mayer, Interim Dean of the J. and Patty Baker School of Business and Technology here at FIT. We are thrilled to have partnered with the Robin Report on this web series as it aligns with the Baker School's academic goals in educating the change makers of tomorrow for the creative industries. Today, we have a terrific panel, but let me introduce you to our moderator, Kim Kitchings, Senior Vice President of Consumer Marketing for Cotton Incorporated. Kim joined Cotton Incorporated in 1996 as Manager of Marketing Research. And currently, her role, she leads consumer and trade advertising, public relations, corporate strategy, global market insights, and strategic alliances. Over her 20-year career in the cotton industry, Kim has been instrumental in strategic assessments of the global consumer demand and market evaluations for cotton. Kim oversees the use of a wide variety of tools such as digital marketing, social media, television, strategic partnerships, and presentations to communicate cotton's message. Kim, I'm going to hand it off to you and let you introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Shannon. I am delighted to be here today and to have this opportunity to talk with each of you and to moderate the discussion on technology and how it's helping to shape our industry, specifically for sustainability in apparel. Joining me today is a distinguished panel representing a wide cross-section of the apparel industry. And today I'm briefly going to introduce them and their titles and then let them share more with you about their roles. Liz Hirschfield is Senior Vice President and Head of Sustainability for J.Crew Group, and she is also Senior Vice President for Sourcing at Madewell. There's a lot in that, Liz. Next, we have Dr. Jesse Daystar. I work with him at Cotton Incorporated. He is our Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer, all things cotton for you and sustainability. And then Dr. John Gudula, I just met recently, Director of Crop Science at SAS Institute, who's literally up the road from us in North Carolina. Welcome. And Bill D'Arienzo. He is founder and chief brand officer of WDA Brand Marketing Strategies, who has created and lectures in the brand management and brand strategies for driving sustainability certificate program at FIT, which many of you, I imagine, know. So we're going to begin, as I mentioned, by letting each one of our panelists talk to you more about their role in sustainability, and then also to answer our first question, and that is, what are some of the biggest challenges today and issues that are facing us in sustainability? So let's begin with Bill. Why don't you start us off?
All right. Well, thanks so much, Kim, for the introduction, and hello, colleagues. I'm delighted to be here today with you. My own role, just very briefly in this space, is I run a program at FIT which I created called Branding Strategies for Sustainability and Circularity. And the premise is until we begin to create a brand strategy, we're not really animating the emotional content that we need to in order to get the kind of commitments that are essential for moving both CSR and ESG forward. In addition, I do pro bono work for what will be, and again, we're not going to pull the curtain back yet, but will be what we think is the most exciting platform, both web and app, for resolving some of the key issues that we're facing in this space. It's called Actionate. It's going to launch in a couple of months. And fundamentally, what it does is it enables consumers, brands, and nonprofits to interface on a common platform and to verify each other's values and to see whether there's alignment on the sustainability front. We think this is the absolute most important type of approach to organize us, focus us, and drive us in the sustainability direction. The problem is that there's no single trusted source for verifiable data. And so we scramble around looking for what is true and what is not. This then gets complicated by the fact we can't identify best practices, which we all know in business is essential. Who's doing it right that we want to perhaps follow, yes, and mirror. And then language and standards become variable and change without notice. So we don't know what sustainability really means, circularity really means, and that creates additional problems. Metrics then falter, measurements then falter. There's a cascading kind of reduction that goes on once you get into this issue. And finally, too often, the standards are designed by the very people who might be creating some of the issues. So the old metaphor of the fox in the hen house, excuse that, but that's in fact the truth of it all, and we can identify some of those. So in conclusion, if consumers are to be the conscience and the court of last resort, it's incumbent upon us to give them the testimony that's valid, that's basically reliable and actionable. And to date, we haven't done that.
Well said, Bill. And I couldn't agree more about standards and metrics and what they mean to our industry and to help us measure our improvements. So thank you for that. Next, let's go to Liz. Liz, share with us your role and then the biggest issues facing you at Madewell and J. Crew.
Sure. So I, as you mentioned, have a wide role. I oversee sustainability for the group and then also sourcing and production for Madewell, which, I actually have a background in sourcing and production, which is actually really helpful in my role in terms of sustainability, just that connection back to the product, not being the only thing that we're working on. But it's really helpful that just being able to connect the dots there and really understand manufacturing and the apparel industry, and then how we can really make change and impact change. I think the thing that, for us that we're really just working on how we leverage our scale as a group to make the biggest impact. And then how we talk about it, within each distinct brand, I think is really important because we want to resonate with our customers so that they, really are really as passionate about it as we are. And I think our biggest problem, honestly, I think is plastic. I mean, the industry is on this journey to rid single-use plastic, and it's been really challenging. There's a lot of work being done collectively across multiple groups and brands to just figure out how to get rid of poly bags. And I think that's the biggest challenge right now that we're always continuing to work on to figure out alternative ways. I mean, we've moved into recycled, but how do you actually get rid of them is the biggest question. And that's, I think, our biggest challenge right now.
Right. Thanks so much, Liz. It definitely is. And we're reading so much about that in the media and other places and trying to make strides. And I'm sure we will as an industry. Jesse, can you add on to this, please?
Sure thing. Jesse Daystar here. I lead the sustainability division at Cotton Incorporated. And we really work within this division to understand and improve sustainability at the farm level, within the supply chain, and even at the consumer and end of life levels of an apparel item. My background is actually in measurement of sustainability, life cycle assessment. I believe that we have to really focus on metrics that are credible and based in good science to make decisions that are going to get us to where we need to go. And I agree, plastic leakage certainly, and just plastic pollution is a big problem. And we're running several research projects to better understand what the apparel industry plastic pollution problem actually looks like with numbers and data. So we're working on that amongst other research that shows biodegradation of natural fibers. And perhaps the biggest problem, I think, is misinformation around sustainability. There's been, as mentioned earlier, a big problem with that. I think for years, there's a lot of different pieces of information out there that maybe weren't so credible. But now as brands go to actually take action and make plans towards meeting sustainability goals, they're really critically looking at this information and realizing it's not what it should be. So they're reinventing, remeasuring, engaging the industry in a more serious way that I think is generating some better information, though we still have some ways to go. So the life cycle assessment and our expertise at Cotton Incorporated are certainly helping that within the cotton industry and the apparel industry.
Yep, Jesse, thanks so much. And we are doing, as he said, significant work in those areas to help all of us, not just the cotton industry, but the textile industry as a whole. John, last but not least.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, Kim, and the Robin Report, and wonderful to speak to you today. So my name is John Gatula. I work at SAS Institute. We're a software company. SAS stands for Statistical Analysis System. And we were founded in the 1970s as a spinoff from NC State University. And today we're the largest privately held software company in the world with something like 11,000 employees worldwide. We got our start in agriculture and specifically mixed models, running mixed models on computer mainframes, which were statistics that just couldn't be done by hand. Today, we work with machine learning across a variety of different industries and introduce analytics not only to people who are data scientists or statisticians per se, but for the daily doer who gets things done. And when I think about sustainability and the challenges around sustainability, my mind immediately goes to waste. Waste of food and fashion materials in our supply chain, waste of human capital from people hand-weeding crops when chemical controls, safe and effective chemical controls are available, and then waste of time and projects for governments and businesses not meeting their own objectives just because maybe the dots aren't being connected, right? So being able to connect the dots among things like testing and verification sources and the initiative that you mentioned, Bill, is absolutely something that will lead up to reducing waste, right? Adoption of analytics in terms of forecasting models and being able to better predict what fashion or other products will be actually consumed will in itself lead to less waste. And then empowering, no matter what the role, sort of the daily frontline individual performer with analytics tools, because coding is no longer a barrier to adopting data analytics and making better decisions in one's role. And so the more we can empower people to make better decisions, I think that will always be a step in the right direction for sustainability.
Great. Thanks so much, John. And for the team, that was very insightful and impactful, talking about everything from the analytics to the plastics to other things that we need to move forward in the industry. Now I'd like to switch gears and talk about what technologies are happening in the marketplace that can help us advance the role sustainability has and how it can impact fashion in so many different ways. Jesse, let's see what you have on technologies for us.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Kim. So when we look at the history, particularly around cotton production, technology has played an important role for improving productivity and sustainability. If you just look at the water efficiency over the last 35 years, we've improved by about 79% in the United States. And that's largely due to the adoption of technology, using more efficient irrigation technologies, using things such as pipe planner, and even better weather forecasting. So sustainability is largely driven through adoption of technology. And we certainly have maybe more technology than we are adopted. So we're currently, always working towards getting that technology into the hands of decision makers. But within the cotton industry, we're really looking at a few key technologies to be adopted into the future to meet our 10-year sustainability goals here in the United States. For example, precision agriculture relies on things such as yield monitoring, understanding what parts of the field are producing at a high rate and planning for that accordingly. And maybe areas that are producing at a lower rate, you can dial back some of the inputs such as fertilizer, so as variable rate fertilizer applications. And we also are looking at how can robotics help with weed control. I think could be some potentially game changers there, as well as maybe within our research at Cotton Incorporated, looking at robotics to even harvest the cotton crop. We're exploring that as well. So I think, robotics will certainly be here into the future. And then just more bread and butter of what's actually happening now around water. We use moisture sensors in the ground to understand when we need to irrigate, and also things such as pipe planner, as I mentioned earlier, weather planning. So some of this is old fashioned, some of this is really cutting edge robotics, but technology drives innovation and sustainability in the cotton industry.
Right. Thanks, Jesse. And it's high tech, right? The things we're looking at doing is so many of this people aren't aware of and know, but for all of us in the industry, it's about continuous improvement and how we move forward. And that's what we're trying to do and measure. Liz, tell us about how this is impactful in your area with retailers and brands.
I think there's so much going on technology wise. If I could focus on waste a little bit, just kind of piggyback on John's intro, that is something that is plaguing the industry. I think there's been so many strides made over the last years around taking waste and turning it into new fibers. Everything from crop waste, to fabric cuttings, repurposing, damaged product and turning it into new fibers. I think that that's been really, really exciting and a really great opportunity for the industry to really get behind that and to help scale it. I think, on our end, we really look towards like circularity and how we can, continue to reuse and recycle our product. But having this technology to actually take waste and leftover fabrics and garments to turn it into new fibers, I think is just game changing. We've done some work with some companies that work on crop waste and actually take crop waste and turn it into new fibers, which is pretty phenomenal because the methane that actually emits from crop waste when it's left to rot or burn is a big issue in the environment. So I think, just getting in the retail industry and apparel brands inspired and kind of backing those types of technologies is really important to move the industry forward.
All right, thanks, Liz. And Madewell, I know, has always been a leader in this area. And J. Crew, I've seen new initiatives from them as well. So thank you for your efforts there. John, now I know that you have a lot to say about data technology. It's what you do at SAS. So tell us about that and what's going on there.
Yeah, how long do we have? Just kidding.
Not that long, John.
So, I'll start by making a case against technology first, right? When do we need technology, or when is technology just the new flashy thing? One thing that resonated with me that someone very wise once told me is that innovation isn't necessarily about creating something new, but it's about helping someone just do their job better, removing an impediment, right? So you look at, if one is working with data and constantly manipulating spreadsheets and doing over and over again, and you look up at the clock and it's suddenly 3 hours later, and where has all of this time gone? Many times jobs like that can be automated and sort of made easier, like sort of on a one-click button, right? So to what extent do we need high technology versus just simple fixes that will make people's jobs easier, right? And with precision agriculture, piggybacking on the sort of structure of what you were talking about, Jesse, I mean, it's a lot about making farmers' jobs easier and about making their decisions sort of more profitable and more sustainable in the long run, right? You're out working in the field, planting all spring, harvesting all fall. The grower is often exhausted, and having to make a split-second decision about an herbicide choice because it's suddenly no longer available in retail, right? Enabling those decisions to happen, somewhat automatically to augment the farmer's judgment is something that we can do today with decision science, right? With IoT and robotics, that's an opportunity to automate some of the labor, for example, weeding labor or harvesting labor that many people do, especially in crops other than cotton in the US and around the world. And that frees up hands and minds to do things that will support our next generation economy, right? So I think we need to be looking at things like improving data literacy among people in the developed and the developing world to support these next generation jobs that we will need to, really tackle major things that are coming our way, right? And then finally, with water and moisture sensors, that's a great example of continuous improvement, right? The concepts that are built into lean manufacturing are the very same things that can enable us to adopt technology in a way that works for us to enhance profitability and sustainability for whatever enterprise you're working on.
Thanks, John. And Bill, as the sole educator here right now on the panel, what do you see as a transformative sustainability technology?
Well, I think source map is something we all, if not already in our top of mind. Source map ought to be something we think about because it touches everything that all of you have spoken about at this point in our chat this evening. What Liz is talking about in terms of making sure that you're working with plastics that are not reintroduced, so to speak, right? What Jesse is talking about in terms of soil assessment, what John is talking about. If you look at source map, what do you really see? You see a snapshot of the supply system. And you see it in such detail that you're able basically to meet two critical, what I would call brand values: transparency, yes, and traceability. And as long as we are able to, or hopefully can, realize those two objectives as values, we're on the path, I think, to really tremendous control, tremendous measurement, and getting to where we need to get to. In addition, if you think about what source map is really doing, it's telling you where problems are before they basically dislocate the system. And that to me saves enormous time in terms of delivering on what the system is promising. And the other thing, Liz, Kim, that I'd like to mention in this regard, I think we need to start talking about supply systems and not talk about supply chains. Now, that may be just an old brand guy, trying to kind of wriggle his way into the conversation, but I really believe this. It changes the consciousness of our responsibilities because it moves from linear thinking, yes, to much more complex interdependent thinking. And that enables us to envision not unrelated chains or links, but interdependent components, which we can then go to that farmer that Jesse is talking about in the field and really see her or him not as something second, third tier, fourth tier contributor, but absolutely to the center of the system that we're all dependent upon. So I want to start thinking about systems thinking, all right, as opposed to linear thinking. And I think that's really critical. And that's fundamentally what source map does.
Yeah. Great points, Bill. And I love that idea of sisters and what that means to us and family and how we can share in it together. I also like what everyone's talking about is really usage of less time it takes to do analytics, less land, less applications, less soil that we need, and to be more profitable in the end is what we all want. So I think some really great points there. Now let's shift for a moment, and I'd like to talk about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, consumer marketing. I always love the consumer. Without them, we don't have a product to put on the shelf if they're not buying it. So what I want to do is let's stick with Bill for a moment and talk to me, Bill, about how well do you think sustainability is being presented and marketed to the consumer today? And what I'm really hitting on is thinking about things like greenwashing, the misinformation we heard Jesse talk about earlier, social media, web content. How do you see and evaluate the market today?
Well, I'm really up in arms. I really am. I mean, I'm seeing things from sources that we would have thought of as being ethical leaders who have really lost their way. And I'm going to bring in Allbirds. Is that okay? Can I know it's kind of like the Holy Grail, but they're being sued. And if you look at the details of the lawsuit, there's tons of greenwashing in there, Kim, that's being, of course, alleged. So we're not saying that they're guilty. However, in the sustainability certificate that I teach at FIT, we look at various ads that are directed to consumers. We looked at the 30-second Allbird ad. We found at least 3 problems in overstatements, yes, unsubstantiated claims, yes, and, if you will, promises that you can't fulfill in 30 seconds. So here's one of the darlings, of our industry, that comes to us with some sense of huge credibility. And in my judgment, and I can show you this 30-second and point to these, these violations, or at least alleged possible violations, they're not really understanding how you easily cross the marketing line into greenwashing, and that there's a difference between sustainable measuring and, if you will, marketing messages. And it's, we were really aghast. I looked at the ad 3 times and it kept coming up. So if a company like Allbirds can fall into this trap, and I'm not saying it's intentional, that's really the problem, isn't it? I'm not saying that, they're devious and they try to be deceptive. It's actually the standards are not universal. They're not clear. And therefore, it's easy to make the mistakes. And the consumers suffer. And by the way, the lawsuit is a consumer lawsuit.
Yes, Bill, thank you. You bring in a current example, and I think also a really good point. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and this is such a complicated area, and we're still learning the measurements and setting the standards. So sometimes it is very difficult to go in and to ensure that some of the regulations that exist that are out there may not be as up to date as they could be either. So there are a lot of things that impact this. Liz, would you like to weigh in on this? And what we're looking about is how this is being marketed to consumers and what you think about what's out there.
Yeah, I agree. I do think there's a lot of greenwashing out there for sure. There's a lot of just kind of spinning things that maybe aren't sustainable, but sound like they are or always were and is not something new, right? I think, for us at Madewell and J. Crew, we really just try to approach it from a very authentic way and really speak to our customers, very truthfully and focus on, the goals and the public commitments we have out there and our progress against them. And, we are really excited about innovation and technology in the industry and partnering, like I said, with, new fibers made out of waste. But, I think we're just really very prudent about how we market the product, and we are very careful that we're actually speaking the truth. I do think it is easy to get, caught up in the marketing piece of it. And, it really, I think the industry and the world as a whole is actually going the other way, really. And I think, we will start to see regulations come down that will prevent that from happening, because it is something that a lot of brands have kind of jumped on. Kind of jumping on the bandwagon, the sustainability bandwagon, without really doing their due diligence or, really ensuring that they're being authentic. So.
Great, Liz. And Jesse, what do you have to add?
Yes, certainly greenwashing is a concern. And I think that sustainability literacy, back to kind of the data literacy, as we mentioned earlier, is important. Understanding what to look for, what it means, and how do I make decisions with that information. So consumers, as well as supply chain, I think has some room to grow in sustainability data literacy. But when we start to look at the lifestyle monitors and consumer sentiment around sustainability, they do see it as important. Some recent study that actually Kim, your group did, found that the numbers for consumers that say that sustainability has a moderate or great influence on their purchasing decisions for clothing has gone up. In the United States, for example, it's gone up from 43 to 57%. That's a 14% increase within the last 3 or 4 years. So we're seeing a trend upwards. I think the world is really waking up to the current issues, particularly around climate change and just sustainability at large. So I think we have some work to do, but the consumers want it.
Yep.
Yeah, Jesse, you make some really good points. And I think as we enter into this next area where we all know about inflation, what's going on in different areas, could impact how much more they look into apparel, the quality, the durability, what lasts, what that means. And all of that comes into sustainability when you talk to a consumer today. And speaking of current events and what are going on, this takes us into our next area. And maybe rather than supply chain efficiencies, I should talk about supply chain sister efficiencies efficiencies. I do like that, Bill. I'm going to start to work that in my vocabulary. But we know that these supply chain sisters, how about the whole three, are part and parcel to sustainability. And no one wants an SKU or a style that doesn't sell. This impacts our bottom line, and it also would contribute to putting more textile waste in landfills, and we want to avoid that. So my question for the panel today is, how are you, or what tools are you using to manage production, including predicting the styles that consumers want to buy, and then managing the inventory so we can avoid that excess waste? Since I'm talking predictive analytics and things, John, I'm going to come back to you.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Kim. I think that it's about knowing your consumer and using all of the digital trails and other clues that we're leaving behind about what we might want to buy. And, when you're ordering, say, 10,000 yards of fabric, you might have to order 6 months out, for example, right? So it's all the more important to be able to accurately forecast what that demand will be, because you just won't have the supply today already, right? And it can't be just like what the merchandiser thinks looks cool or will sell, right? It has to be sort of based on data and what people are interacting with. Lord knows we're leaving a lot of digital trails in our behind and our wake every single day, right? I think the other thing to note from a predictive analytics standpoint is that means are rarely the answer, right? We have heard of the law of means, but it's really about the flaw of means, right? You take the average of kids or of people and you get really nonsensical answers, right? And so you really have to base predictive analytics based on sort of stratifications of different groups and what they like. And then ultimately you may arrive that, hey, what? Mom jeans are good for moms and teens alike, and will create a number of those jeans to satisfy both of those groups with their distinct but unified demands.
Well, personally, I love mom jeans, so good. I'm glad to hear that you're a proponent too. And Liz, you're no stranger to this area. Please tell us about your real world experience and the relevance to this issue.
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic. I think we use multiple different ways to kind of inform our buys. We do have a pretty significant group chat with our customers where we really ask for feedback. We might even do wear tests. We'll send pictures, to get just feedback on, new developments and product and what they want and what they're most interested in. We do also have some technology that we're just implementing that's going to help us really kind of, compile, customer feedback and customer, like what they prefer to help inform our buys. And then, we do, and I think it's a combination. We also have, reviews and comments on our e-com page that are really helpful. So it's really like, it's not just one thing, it's a bunch of different things that come together. And then I think we've also learned that it's okay to sell out of something. It actually creates demand, and you don't have to buy so much because you're afraid of missing a sale. It's okay to actually sell out of something.
No, absolutely, because everyone doesn't want to look like everyone else when you go through, and that doesn't matter what age you are or where you're at. And it's also more sustainable, and if it's good quality, like many of the products are that in the retailers you're representing, it lasts a long time.
Agreed.
So very good points. Our next and last area for this section, we're going to talk about, again, the consumer still, and we often hear in the media and buzz that sustainability is important to the consumer. And we just heard Jesse talk about how that's increasing. And I think it was accelerated as we discussed after the pandemic and what's occurred. But what I would like to know from each of you is if you agree with this or not. Do you think that it's just a trend? It's something that everyone's jumping on the bandwagon on right now? Or is it a seismic shift? How important do you think sustainability is becoming also to the investment community when they're looking at making recommendations? Bill, I think this sounds like it's right in your wheelhouse. So let's start with you.
I can't wait to get my arms around this one. That's for sure. Well, let's begin with the investment community, because that tells me what BlackRock has done. Yes, both Barbara and the co-CEO is fundamentally a seismic shift. Again, if we read those letters to the shareholders, yes, and to the clients, it's very specifically, we're not going to invest in any company that can't tell us specifically why they're on the road to sustainability, how they're on the road, how they're measuring, and then tie it back to their own profitability and growth and market share growth. This is unheard of 5 years ago. And it kind of ties in with what Jesse's saying about a shift in consciousness. If the consumers begin this accelerated shift and finance begins, government can't be far behind. And that that trilogy, yes, of power, because it's going to take power and authority, we're going to start to move in an accelerated direction. That's a $5 billion finance company that's really taken the lead here. And if that isn't a seismic shift, I mean, you can't imagine him turning around tomorrow and saying, "Whoops, I made a mistake. Let me write another letter." That's not happening. I mean, he is really committing himself and his company and the profitability of his company on the line. I also think that when we start talking about price as the deterrent to consumer commitment to products that may have other components in it that increases their value, all right, and therefore their price, because they add to sustainability or circularity or resale, we end up communicating what value really means. And it doesn't have to do with price. I think we get frightened. We're afraid we're going to lose a sale. Liz is saying we don't have to make every sale, and she's absolutely right. And we stop thinking about value as price. I think we're going to be on the road to success at a much more accelerated pace.
Great, Bill. Thank you. Liz, tell us what the J. Crew and Madewell consumers are telling you.
Yeah, it's really top of mind. I mean, I don't think it's just a trend. I think, it's been slowly and now much more quickly becoming just kind of what everyone needs to do. I think, 10 years from now, brands really aren't going to survive unless they really have a solid foundation. And, not only sustainable sourcing and product, but ethical and so people and planet, I think is really important to consumer. Our consumers are very vocal, particularly on the Madewell side. It is kind of just the ethos of our brand. They want it. We speak to them about it all the time. They're very concerned about it. I think as it becomes more, just more accessible, because I do think that, in the past it's been either expensive or maybe the product isn't that great. And I do think that that's the one thing you can't forget is when you are designing and selling a product, it still has to be something that the customer wants. They're not going to buy it just because it's sustainable or good for the environment. They want it to be good and sustainable, but they're going to buy what they want. But they are starting to align their purchasing behaviors more with brands that align with their values. And I think we're really seeing that as a shift as well. So I definitely think this is going to continue on. I think as Gen Z becomes the dominant purchaser, we're really going to see it. Resale is one of the fastest growing segments of our industry. And it's really powered by, the customer that wants to, thrift and shop vintage. And it's not the same customer that wants to buy new. It isn't. It's really, so I think our industry is really evolving and changing. And I do think brands that are not on this path already are going to have a real problem.
Yep, and I agree, because it's not a one size fits all, and each consumer is at a different place in their journey. And globally, we've done research in, I guess it's 7 countries now. In Europe, it's very different than it is here in the US, and still about awareness and learning and engagement. And we're getting to action, right, where they can take and participate in different programs. Jesse, what's your take on this?
Certainly. I think it's important to remember kind of where we are right as we speak. COP26 is occurring, and there's a huge focus on climate change right now. And they're trying to figure out how we as society are going to, solve some of these big challenges. And The United States Biden has plans to cut United States emissions by half by 2030. So there's significant challenges that are really occurring. And climate change is really at the front of mind for many consumers. The Global Lifestyle Monitor reported that 44% of consumers ranked climate change as the number one or number two concern. So we see that to be really, in my opinion, a focal point for the world and the industry. And we look towards cotton and what the industry and apparel industry is doing. We're certainly looking at how we can use renewable energy, how we can put more carbon in the ground through practicing regenerative agriculture practices, and be more efficient overall. And I think within the cotton industry, there's been, and more even within the apparel industry, many sustainability programs that are looking and working towards continuous improvement. The U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol is one of those. So I think climate change is certainly where we're going to be looking and pushing, and that generally will help all the other indicators too. So it's exciting, yet a lot of work to be done here.
I think that does sum it up, Jesse. There's a significant amount of work to be done, but we are seeing more movement than we've ever seen, more interest today than we have. And we're getting there and getting there collectively as an industry and looking at improvements we can make all the way from raw fiber through the shelf and what that means. And I think it's also critical and important to call out the work that FIT is doing here and the education that you're offering. And it's not just for students, textile professionals, looking at others in the investment community and even regulators, and what can we do as an industry to help them and bring them along is something that we have to continue to look at and to help us all in the industry to improve. I want to thank each of you today for your time and taking us and informative answers, and hopefully we've shed light on some different areas, but we're not done quite yet. We are going to have some additional Q&A. I would like to introduce to you Dr. Ajoy Sakar, a professor and assistant chairperson in the Textile Development and Marketing Department at the Fashion Institute of Technology. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Kim. It was a very, very good discussion. Now, having heard all of you, I have some very specific questions for each one of you. So let's begin with Liz. I'd like to know what your organization is doing with regard to verification of sustainable fashion in the supply chain. Are you working with labs, NGOs for validation from fiber to the end product? So if you can say something.
We do work
about
with
that.
labs, for any type of sustainable product. Most of our, all of our sustainable fibers are certified in some way, whether they're GOTS or OCS or GRS. We work with a lot of suppliers that are actually also certified, so the product can be certified, through the entire process. But we definitely have third-party certification for any sustainable claims that we're making in terms of fiber, when it comes to fibers, for sure.
So with regard to that, for Jesse, here's a question. Where do you think, in your research and all the research that Cotton Inc. has done, where is the biggest return of investment with regard to sustainability in the supply chain? Is it in materials? Is it in the process? Is it post-consumer? Where do you see is the biggest bang for the buck, if you will?
That's a great question. And I'm going to put on my, sustainability metrics hat. So bang for the buck in terms of improvement in sustainability. That's kind of what I'll answer to. When we look at the climate change impacts of a t-shirt, about 50% of that comes from the manufacturing of the garment. About 50% comes from the washing and drying of the clothing, so very energy intensive, and a small slice of that will actually come from the growing of the cotton. So we certainly are focused on helping cotton be more sustainable at the agriculture phase, but the biggest gains for the apparel industry really lie in the textile manufacturing. So the biggest hotspots there is spinning. The yarn is very energy intensive. I think there's some plug and play technologies, renewables, for example, that could drastically reduce the climate change impacts around that, as well as other impacts. So, today technology is a matter of implementing today's technology. And I think that's where the black rat conversation comes in. How can we make capital available for these improvements? Additionally, the dyeing and finishing, likewise, there's a lot of opportunity for renewable energy to be implemented. So I think that's really key. And then also with the aspect of consumer use, I think that we can focus on using cold water and being more energy efficient, as well as using more renewable energy. And then something I didn't mention, but also is important, is longevity and durability of the products. I think that, as mentioned earlier, the vintage, the second, third, fourth life. Make sure that we design products that are durable, that are going to last and stay a bit timeless so that they have many lives. And then maybe even go one step further to design them as biodegradable, maybe compostable. How can we use natural materials that will not make plastic waste, that they won't be plastic waste in themselves? They'll biodegrade into soils, which then we can use to grow more cotton, for example. So thinking in a cycle and a holistic manner and really focusing on where the impacts occur and using today's technologies to make those improvements.
Thank you. And Bill, with your background in branding and marketing, which demographic do you think that messages regarding sustainability should be directed to? Is it the Gen Z? Is it the millennials? Is it people now with disposable income? Which would be the best population to direct our messages to?
Well, Ajoy, I mean, we've got two fundamental groups. To Liz's earlier point, we've got to focus on what I would call zillennials. I don't know why we say Gen Z. I like to call them zillennials. Then it's easier to say zillennials, millennials, and we perhaps can have a rhythm that's more readily recalled. But also, I think we miss where the money is and where the authority is. The gray foxes, right? And the generations that have passed through, retired people, that is, people in authority who can now bring their buying power, certainly their gravitas to the conversation. And I think we leave them out too often. And I think they can be a huge force. So it should be to everyone, for sure. But we have limited resources and we want to move and accelerate this process. So I think we need to begin for the next generation who's coming in, the zillennials. And again, the gray foxes and those just below them. By the way, the huge amount of buying power, huge amount. And if you look at some of the data that Jesse has mentioned as to the receptivity to sustainability, no one talks about the fact that those generations, the older retired generations, are hugely committed to this, all right? They see it as an ethical issue of consequence. So I see the two, if you will, posts, the beginning and I don't want to say the end, I'll say the latter part, are the two focal points that I think will give stability and acceleration to the changes.
Thank you. And John, you are an expert in technology. So where do you see future technologies for sustainability in the supply chain? Is it the ERP systems? Is it the blockchain? Is it things like using DNA to do traceability? Where do you think it's going?
Yeah. So I think with ERP systems, those are certainly examples of things that help planning managers and resource managers get their jobs done better, right? And for every unit of increase in the usability or applicability of ERP systems, we're definitely going to see benefits compound. When it comes to traceability and blockchain, on one hand, that's an example of, we can improve the traceability of fibers to ultimately perhaps find out which state in the country the cotton was grown that was exported overseas to be woven into textiles to come back, and we can find out, this shirt indeed came from North Carolina, though it took a long way around, right? What's the validity of that when, for example, we can create a new system where we grow it locally, spin it locally, gin it locally, and serve it up to consumers locally, right? So there aren't always technology, fixes to different things. I think what will create the foundation for new systems and new systems thinking it's a couple of things, right? It's empowering people to do better at their job, whatever it is, to make those connections outside of maybe what they usually do in their daily work, right? To gain visibility into what's happening in the supply chain or downstream or upstream of where they normally work. And then finally, when it comes to incentivizing sustainability and how are we going to change it? I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that private companies, publicly traded companies, they have a singular objective, which is to maximize profit, right? Maximize profit given a system of constraints, right? Supply, competition, foot traffic, web traffic, but it's always to maximize profit, right? So I think that, as Liz was talking about, as consumer behaviors align toward sustainable values, that will drive a change in the industry that aligns with, the current needs of for-profit companies. But then finally, I think it will be important, if we're serious about implementing some of these changes and implementing some of these systems-wide changes, is to perhaps introduce new constraints, which would come through regulatory functions and regulatory agreements, right? The validity of each of which will, require a cost and a trade-off. And I think that knowing what those are and being able to anticipate those will make all the difference to make sure that everyone is, getting what they need, and we're still fulfilling the goals that we need to continue building a healthy and prosperous society.
And I have one more question for Liz, and anyone else can jump in too. So we have been talking a lot about sustainability, and here at FIT, our students are interested not only in sustainability, but in innovation. And within innovation, I want to ask about eco-innovation. So Liz, in your opinion, between, let's say, recycling and upcycling and new fibers and circularity in general, can you give us some idea about what companies like your company is doing in each of these areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, circularity is something that's really important across the company. And so we're kind of approaching it in multiple different ways. First is training our design team on how to think about designing product so it could be recycled and thinking about the end of life of the product. Second is, building an infrastructure where we can upcycle and design new product out of product that's damaged, right, that we get back, that we currently recycle, which is great, but if we could turn that into something new, that's definitely, I think, the hardest part, because it isn't as consistent and easy, not that designing product is easy, it's just different all the time. So it takes a different mindset and just the infrastructure to actually enable that. But it's something we're really, really excited about. And then as we think about fibers, we definitely have been working on testing new innovations. As I mentioned, there's a company called Circular Systems that we work with that takes crop waste and turns it into fiber. And so we think that those types of things are really interesting for us. And then again, as we think about like our cutting waste at our mills and our factories, working on how we can repurpose those. So a lot of different ways we're approaching it. I think it is complicated. And then of course we have resale. I mean, we just launched Madewell Forever this past summer, which is resale for denim, the Madewell side, and we'll definitely be exploring that in more categories and across the company. Madewell's a great place for us to test things like this. Also opened a circular pop-up store. It was really focused on education. We have a variety of different products that are pre-loved, as we like to call it, but it's really about education and teaching the customer how to repair their product, how to take care of it. You can bring product in and there's a repair center there. We actually partnered with Patagonia Wornwear team, and they're holding seminars on how to train, teach people how to take care of their clothes and repair them. So there's all sorts of different ways that we're approaching it, and we're kind of just testing a bunch of things. I think resale as a business, and just because we have a platform for it, we have a website that you can go to and shop, is like probably the most kind of complete, if that makes sense. You know, we'll learn and we'll add product onto it and grow it across the company. And the other areas are really, we're just like really starting to kind of just gain that kind of expertise in it.
And Dr. Sakar, I'll jump in there too with Liz and agree with her 100%. Supply chains are hard to find and to develop. We've had a program for 15 years at Cotton Incorporated, Blue Jeans Go Green, where we've been able to take denim and turn it into insulation. Historically, it's gone into housing, but now we're looking at other opportunities that are very current too. So you think about the food boxes people order now. The insulation from the recycled denim is wonderful in there, and it helps keep cold or warm. And that's definitely a new use. We are also looking at new programs in Europe, but it's that supply chain that's difficult that Liz mentioned, and who are the partners that can help us with that. But trying to inspire things that are convenient for the consumers will move us all forward and help us with this, and how we can tie it back up. I think to have a better world is really what we're looking to do.
Absolutely. Kim, I was remiss in not mentioning that Blue Jeans Grow Green, and recycling denim is a huge piece of Madewell circularity. And we have been a part of that program for many years. And I think we've recycled over 1 million pairs of jeans so far. So that was really the stepping stone to resale for us. So it's a great, great program.
Yeah. And Liz's team has done a fabulous job in social media with that. And that's part of the awareness and bringing the consumer along. And it's not just the consumers, other retailers look at Madewell too. So they have been wonderful partners.
Can I add something to this, and just perhaps bring in the branding element in brand storytelling? If you go up on the Eileen Fisher website, she has, Liz, an actual wonderful video of using rework fabrics, no longer in sportswear, but for throw pillows, yes, or for curtains, or items such as that. So it doesn't have to be directly reborn again into sportswear. That is the imagination. But they've taken the time on the website to show the process of their cutting it and sewing it, and in a sense, reborn again what used to be tossed away. Yeah. And I think that's very emotionally riveting. In addition, they merchandise their Renew collection, which is their recycled and refurbished collection, with their regular line. In other words, they don't treat it as an afterthought. That gives it credibility. Yes, that gives it vitality. And that makes the consumer not see it as something tossed away, but something that is relevant to the fashion statement that Eileen Fisher is understood to have been about for many, many years. So I think that storytelling, we've got to tell the story. And brand storytelling in this space, I think, is going to make a huge difference.
And I have one last question. How has climate change and the pandemic, as also the social movements, BLM and such, affected the sustainability, the entire supply chain sustainability, let's say in the past 20 months, 24 months?
You know, I think from a brand perspective, it's really made us double down on it. You know, I think we're actually really proud partners with Fair Trade USA. And we have goals on both sides of the business, J.Crew and Madewell, around our key product categories being 90% fair trade approved by 2025. And one of the things that we keep hearing is during the pandemic, one of our factories, you know, I don't know if everyone knows a lot about the program, but it's very comprehensive in terms of worker empowerment, but it's also financial stability. And so we pay a premium directly to the workers who work on our product based on the product that they manufacture. And it goes directly to a bank account that they can only access, and they decide what to do. One of the factories, the year like in 2019, they bought supplemental health insurance. And so, you know, the owner of the factory can't stop talking about like how impactful that was for these people in their lives. And so for us, that was just really inspiring to continue to like actually push forward Obviously, with BLM and all the things going on, we have a 15% pledge, and it's really brought our attention to like our community and really just increasing our investment, frankly, and I think a lot of folks that are on the journey, that the pandemic did do that for them.
And I think that ties very well with Bill's telling the complete story, sustainability from different aspects.
Agree.
Well, thank you, Kim. Those are all my questions.
Absolutely. I think this has been a phenomenal panel and one that has added value to all of us today, as well as hopefully the students listening. And we've got things to do. We're not finished yet. There's a lot to move forward with, but there's a lot of great opportunities awaiting us and to make the earth a better place. So thank you to everyone on the panel today for all the good work you're doing. And it's not just for the apparel industry and the textile industry, it's for all of us across the board. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Wonderful conversation.
Bye-bye, everybody.